ahead and introduce our two speakers for today. Robin Fuller, who is the co-founder of Trifectix and the chief software architect of Orca, which is the company's flagship unified application release and configuration automation solution. He's being joined today by Scott Turner, who leads the digital and product marketing at Trifectix. And prior to joining the company, he was director of M&A and marketing planning and operations for a number of companies that Dell acquired to form the nucleus of its new Dell Software Business Unit. So welcome to you both, Robin and Scott. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Charlene.
Indeed. Excited to be here.
Yeah.
Great.
And so, like you said, good morning to everyone. Yeah.
No, go right ahead.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say thank you to everyone attending. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you are. My name is Scott Turner, and I am joined today with Orca co-founder and chief architect Robin Fuller. You will be hearing the dulcet tones of Robin Fuller later on. And as I mentioned, he is co-founder of Orca. And just really quickly, as a backgrounder on Orca, for the past 16 years or so, the founders of Orca have been building really important DevOps software long before I think it was even called DevOps. But either way, they have created some fantastic build automation software known as BuildForge, which is now part of IBM, and application release automation software in the form of Paralogics, which is now part of BMC software.
Great. Well, I know that you guys are going to have tons of information to impart today for our audience members. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Scott. But before I do, we do have the first of our, I think there are 3 polling questions for today's event, and we really would like the audience to get involved here. So the question is, what is your biggest pain point regarding application release and configuration management? So you have a number of different selections that you can choose. The first is compliance or drift detection, then the ability to update or release software throughout the life cycle, release coordination, role-based access control to infrastructure, or something else altogether. So we'll give the audience another 5 seconds or so to go ahead and make their selection before we share the poll results.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Charlene. So as you're coming up with your answer to that question regarding your biggest pain in this area, I wanted to maybe take a quick step back and look at the topic of DevOps altogether. And by our way of reckoning, we've actually seen what we believe to be a lot of progress in the realm of DevOps. It just looks like a whole lot of our progress has really benefited the folks in Dev. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. So first off, you've got a number of really interesting new methodologies that have cropped up over the past couple of years, be it Agile with its focus on quick teamwork and collaboration, or Lean, which is eliminating waste in your development processes and amplifying the learnings that you create along the way. We've really seen a lot of faster, more responsive software cycles, and those have actually been even amplified by some of the terrific new dev technologies, some of which we've already mentioned here, like build automation, test automation, and certainly all the excitement, the well-deserved excitement around containers. So obviously conferences, webinars, white papers, even books have been devoted to the success of these methodologies and technologies, which have benefited Dev so much. And that kind of brings up the question, is it DevOps or is it Dev? Because while we're seeing continuous integration being more and more commonplace, it sure looks to us as if Ops is struggling to keep up with their pace.
So, Scott, why is Ops struggling these days?
I'm really glad you asked, Robin. So first off, I would say ops is quite different.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that. Just a little bit more. Why is ops different?
Yeah. So obviously, the work that ops does is customer-facing in nearly every case. The stakes are that much higher when the world is watching, right? And as a result of that, so much of what ops does is actually revenue impacting quite directly. And so when the stakes are that high, you've got so many different stakeholders keeping a watch of things, controlling things, and reviewing things before anything gets changed. And you've got a lot of moving parts, lots of environments to consider. And so at the end of the day, ops has just been slower to benefit. And no DevOps presentation would be complete without this mandatory slide. So here you go. And if you're one of the few people who's not yet seen this slide, hopefully you're getting a giggle. But I think most of us have seen this because it is so true. Yeah, worked fine in my dev environment or on my dev laptop, and it's ops problem now. But beyond that meme, the reality is that when ops breaks, people suffer, and that suffering can take any number of forms. It could be long lines at the airport, it could be phones ringing off the hook for service and support, it could be lost customers, missed flights, missed revenue, and in some cases, lawsuits. Not a great situation. So ops has very different concerns than their counterparts in dev, one of which is scale, the ability to scale out beyond that proverbial dev laptop. Another certainly is stability. In the stability in the real world between a number of different environments, keeping things highly available at all times, because it is so customer facing and revenue impacting. And then when something goes wrong, and things do go wrong, you need that service and support in ops, and that means something very different in the ops world and in production environments than it does in the dev world. Going to different forums and Googling answers and things like that, that doesn't work quite as well in this high-stakes environment than calling someone and getting the kind of support that you paid for and you need to just make things work. So again, ops is super different than dev. And then lastly, none of these lists would ever be complete without calling out security quite directly. In an ops and production environment, all of those ongoing tweaks to the infrastructure to make things run better, etc., they cannot afford, the ops folks cannot afford to leave some kind of proverbial door open to the bad guys in the midst of all those ongoing changes. So from an application perspective, ops is concerned with those production workflows. First off, with releasing software in a drama-free way that that automates things, moves it faster, and tries to do so in an error-free way. And then once it's out in the world, to keep the ongoing configuration management of that straight. And then to keep an eye out for monitoring the effects of those changes, perhaps drift detection for compliance purposes, things like that. So to add to that complexity, you've got multiple environments that you have to consider. You've got different OSs in an operations environment. It could be Microsoft Linux, AIX, multiple middlewares, perhaps IIS, complex things like WebSphere. And you've got the configurations to manage between the applications, databases, middlewares, and OSs to keep it all straight. And then you've got these multiple audiences. Each of those stakeholders care a whole lot about how this stuff works. So you've got application owners, database folks, operating systems and middleware people, IT ops folks. Then you've got the complex administration. You've got all those eyes on you. You've got the doers, sure. You've also got the viewers and approvers and everyone's favorite, the friendly auditors, to make sure things are going well. So here's where things start to get a bit interesting. You've got a number of interdependencies developing between these different teams, these different environments. They need communication and collaboration. They also need software to work between them. And speaking of software, each of these folks has their own budgets in many cases, and so they quite rationally want to start automating their environments. And so you see a number of point solutions popping up for the very specific benefit of individuals in different pieces of that organization. So you've got toolchain, you've got multiple point solution proliferation depending on use cases, environments, and spending budgets. And so really,
Scott, what did you do there? That looks like a serious mess.
It's a serious mess, and I think it's probably the real world for a lot of folks, and this is probably even on the simple side because, you know, obviously we couldn't show just how complex real-world organizations are on one slide.
I seriously expect you to have told me that the dog ate your homework next, but moving beyond that, what can we do about this?
What can we do about it? Well, let's see. If we consult our DevOps brethren in many cases, and sometimes our colleagues over on the dev side of the world, they might tell us, hey, why aren't you like your older, taller, more successful brother, and why can't you just work together and work faster and be more transparent and, you know, eliminate all those mistakes, and by the way, just automate everything like we've done in dev.
Okay, and how would somebody do that today?
Robin, I'm glad you asked. So I'm here to tell you that it actually can be done, and one way of achieving that process control, that control over your environment, is by adopting ITIL. If you're a fan of documentation, then that's a good thing. ITIL might be for you. And I guess a perfect example, or an example, might be, you know, if you think through, if you have a disaster recovery event, do you have, for instance, do you have 100% of all of your production level configurations dressed up, 100% ready to go?
Probably not.
Well, then ITIL and documentation might be at least a big part of your answer. And then to achieve some of the goals of ITIL and documentation and process control and collaboration, certainly you need better and more communication, and that's just the truth of it. So everyone loves meetings, but it is kind of interesting when you take a look around and you see, you start counting the number of people that are in your meetings to review process changes and planned changes, and then even to react to unplanned changes and fire drill. You start adding up the time, and you start doing some back-of-the-napkin calculations for what every person in there is getting paid on an hourly basis times the number of people and how many times that happens per week, per month, per year, and you start realizing just how much time and resources is devoted to meetings. And we hit on this a bit earlier. As is rational, a lot of folks will they will make good use of their budgets in their own environment and for their own specific use cases. And so you have the proliferation of point tools to automate things, and that automation is good, and in some cases it's really good up to a point. And then of course you want to have integrations and to orchestrate that work, because connected work is better work. So again, it is indeed possible, and this probably reflects the real world for a lot of the folks here on the phone that you've got some notion of control over these messy processes with ITIL and the documentation it brings, the communication, sometimes over-communication, the proliferation of point tools to automate environments, and certainly to integrate those. And so in this world, you may be familiar with new rules on some late night comedians shows. So here are some old rules here. Old rule number 1 is don't ever make a scripting error, and certainly don't deploy it out in your environment. That's a certain recipe for those long lines at the airport that you saw the graphic of earlier. Another rule is don't ever let those integrations break. That's where a whole lot of firefighting happens, and one area doesn't communicate with another and all heck starts to break loose. Corollary to that, and this is, Robin was insisting on this, is that we don't ever upgrade a key API. Mm-hmm. And then rule number 3 is don't let anyone who ever wrote your scripts or build those fancy integrations, don't ever let them quit on you or take a sick day or certainly go on vacation, because bad things can happen when the knowledgeable people are not there and you've got your tidy system kind of glued together with their expertise. So, Robin, is this easy?
Oh, no, definitely not. That's a lot of overhead right there.
It kind of looks costly to me.
Yeah, I would say so. I'm just remembering that meeting picture. I can just see the digits,
yeah,
quadruple digits rolling through there.
And to my eyes, it kind of looks like a recipe for business as usual.
Yeah, from what I've heard across the globe is that's how a lot of places operate right now. So.
Yeah, it kind of looks like business as usual, just do it faster and better and be like the folks in dev. So it's a real shame that there is no alternative, huh?
That's a terrible shame.
Or is there?
Is there, Scott?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So we're going to introduce here in a moment a configuration and application release automation solution called Orca that's going to have a lot of the elements that we discussed the need for. So one of which is to automate the production workflows of configuration automation and of application release automation. And Robin will give you a tour of some built-in integrations between these different environments and between these different softwares. And then you'll also notice as we're going that it has an intuitive scripting-free interface. So it kind of removes the inherent dangers in those fragile scripts that you hear the Gartner analysts talk about. And then you'll also see that it is a visual, object-oriented software platform that can be used to detect and correct drift that violates policy compliance standards, for instance. So Robin's going to tell you what he's going to show you in just a moment.
Right. So today, I'm going to give you a quick introduction and sort of navigate around a bit of Orca first, and then I'm going to show you a demo of deploying an app. This app is going to involve application content, configuration changes for the middleware, as well as schema changes for the database supporting that application. We're going to be deploying this application into production. We're first going to perform a dry run of that application, and that's going to fail. We're going to do a minor fix. Dry run it again. It's going to succeed as a dry run, giving us that little bit of extra confidence that this will succeed when we actually go and deploy it. And we're going to do that deployment, and then Orca is going to show us what changed between the prior version of that application and the one that we just deployed. And as these changes are expected, we're going to sort of update our master config record for this application in the production environment, and that's going to be our basis for drift going forward. And then we're also going to have a sort of dev coming in on the back door, making a tweak to our production environment, and we're going to show Orca detecting that and then remediating that change the dev made so that we are in control of our production environment. So that's what I'm going to show today.
Yeah, and as we're switching over to our dev environment, Charlene, did you have another poll question?
There is absolutely another poll question. We'll go ahead and pull that up now.
Do we need to go
Okay, the second poll here is, what do you use for application release from dev through your production environment? Got a few choices there. Select one of three, which first one is commercial app release automation solution, internally developed tool, or custom scripting. So if you in the audience there would like to participate, we'd love to know what your answers are, and we'll give you a few more minutes, or sorry, a few more seconds, and then we'll go ahead on with the presentation. And then as I neglected to mention earlier, and I apologize for that, the poll results actually are being tweeted out. So check your Twitter feed at devops.com for the poll results. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you guys.
Very good.
All right, thank you, Charlene. Let me just resume this, I believe. Actually, I think you're still sharing the poll results, so once that comes back, I'll continue. Okay. So you should be seeing now the Orchid Dashboard. And what we're looking at here are three different views of your ecosystem. You can think of this as looking at your environment under a microscope, essentially. So on the left-hand side, we're actually looking at our entire ecosystem, or everything that we've defined within Orca. So each of these first sort of level dots here represent different applications or different views of the ecosystem that I've configured within Orca. And then subsequently, I'm looking at a single application here in the middle. In this case, this is my e-commerce app. And then also on the right-hand side here, the third green circle, this is actually perhaps a view for a database administrator looking at some number of database servers distributed across production, development, and QA. Furthermore, on this dashboard, I've got a few other sort of summary pieces of information. I've got some pass-fail information, recent failed jobs, upcoming events, and anything in the system that is waiting for me to approve. And this can be things like change requests, deployments, anything that needs that extra level of control over when it's going to occur, or if it's a valid change request itself indeed. So as I said earlier, actually what I'm going to want to do first is I'm just going to jump into a particular ecosystem here. So I'm going to jump into this IIS node. These red dots indicate something that Orca has detected as being in a drifted state or out of compliance. So what I want to do is I just want to click on one of these red dots and take a look at what we see within Orca. So when we clicked on that, we're taken to the ecosystem for this application. And so what we see here is a representation of all the services and stacks basically for an application within each of its different environments. So for my e-commerce application here, I can see that I've configured it to manage it in the development environment, QA environment, production environment, DR, and also a post-production environment as well. And then we can see within each of these environments the stack that this application runs on. So we've got some system level configurations, that would be the OS. I've got a messaging queue, SQL Server, and the IIS configurations itself. Now this production environment has two different IIS pools, and we've detected some issues, or Orca has detected some issues over on the first pool A of this. And if I just expand some of this configuration data here, one other thing I want to sort of point out as we're looking through this, the left-hand side shows the structure of the application where it's running. The right-hand side shows a specific service layer of that application. So in this case, this IIS node is actually representing two different IIS servers. And so we would expect the configuration for these servers to be nearly identical with some minor changes between the two of them for their specific server specifics. So as I sort of navigate through this information, Orca has highlighted some of the issues that we have detected within this. For example, the application pool here, Orca's determined that there's been a drift that has occurred, and that's represented by this little triangle over on the right-hand side. And clicking that is going to give me the changes between the baseline and what is the actual values of on the servers themselves right now. Similarly, if I have compliance rules defined against this, for example, I have a compliance rule on clear text, Orca is going to give me another little icon as a sort of round circle here with an exclamation mark on it. When I click that, that's going to show me what is what rule is being broken here, or why is this node out of compliance. And in this case, it's identifying that I'm non-compliant with my CIS 128 rule, saying that my login method should not be clear text, whereas it is clear text, and it's identified on which set of servers within that this node is managing that rule is non-compliant against. So this is sort of what we do within Orca. We have this views of the configuration data. Another thing about configuration data that I want to point out is that Orca is contextually aware of the configuration data itself. So if I were to ask you, what are the actual login methods that are available for IIS? You know, for the most part, nobody's going to know straight off the back of their head unless they're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. But within Orca, you know, you don't have to have that direct interaction, day-to-day interaction with it. I can just click on it, and Orca is going to give me that valid set of what I should be. So I probably want to change that to interactive. But you know, I have this remediate button, which would actually just go ahead and fix everything for me. And so that's some of the things that we can do for you. But as I said today, we want to deploy an application. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you the environment we're going to deploy it into. And this is going to be our customer-focused environment. This is an IIS application. Again, it's running on SQL Server, and there is an OS component of it as well that we want to manage or keep track of. We're going to be deploying it into our production environment. Everything is white now, so there's no issues on it. It's just going to be a single server deployment for this demonstration, but again, this could be going to multiple servers across any sort of data center as well that we desired. Right now, we don't have an app. No, we do actually over here. Right now, we do have the applications defined in this production environment. Right now, we have deployed version 3.2, and we're going to upgrade to version 3.3. What does an application look like in Orca, or how do I define one? So what I want to do is head over to this applications area here. I'm going to choose this application that we're going to be deploying. Right now, we're looking at version 3.4. That is the latest defined version, probably in development right now. But I'm going to click on the 3.3 version, and this is what we're going to be deploying. So within Orca, each application version is broken down by a relevant piece of content, and we base this breakdown on what the boundary is between the pieces of content and maybe where it's going. So for this application, what I have is I'm managing the web configs at different levels. So I have an acceptance environment config and also a production environment config, because I want those to be slightly different. I'm going to be deploying that out. We have schema files. In this case, it's the upgrade file from 3.2 to 3.3. And that's going to be targeted to our SQL Server. And we have application files as well. And this set of files represents the entire application itself. What we see here is for each piece of content, we identify how we're retrieving that content. And in this case, we're pulling it from Subversion. And this method here that I've defined is actually defined over in the application sources. And this identifies which client machine to use to actually pull that content from, and then the deployment itself identifies where it's going to. The target role identifies what type of Orca machine should, or Orca node should accept this content. So for the case of the web configs, the application files, they're going to IIS machines. And for the schema file itself, the upgrade file, that's going to be deployed over onto a SQL Server machine. So I don't want to deploy my SQL content over on IIS. Now, the last piece of information for each piece of content is basically the deploy activity. And that's saying, when the content reaches that target location or target set of servers, what do I do with it? So in the case of the web config files, I'm just going to be deploying it to some location on the file system, similarly with the application files. And the schema content itself, what I want to do is apply that schema file that's going to be deployed. So I'm using this apply DDL and DML files deployment activity. So as I said earlier, what I want to do is deploy this application out onto my production environment. If it wasn't already defined over here, all I would do is assign new application version to it. So maybe in the future I'd want to apply 3.4. I would just select that version and save it. But to deploy this application, all we do is we right-click on this high-level sort of container node here. I'm going to do an execute from here. And so I can construct it manually by dropping in these different roles and then dropping in the different application pieces into those roles. But I've actually have a sort of predefined workflow that I created when I deployed this out into my acceptance environment. So what I'm going to do is just append that. But before I want to deploy this application, I also want to back up my database. So I'm actually going to append this little job here, and this is what this job does is it takes my IIS servers offline, and then it's going to back up my database as well. So I'll just append that there, and that's going to construct that little workflow here. So we're first of all taking our IIS server offline, we're doing our database backup in the SQL Server role, and then we're bringing IIS back online. So this is like a hard stop and backup, just to make sure nothing's interacting with it during the install. And then, as I said before, the other workflow that I want to drop in is the actual deploy of the Customer Focus 3.3 application. And I'm going to append that there. Now, I don't actually want to start my IIS system or service before the deployment, so I want to move this down to after the deployment. So I'll just grab that and drop it down till after the deployment itself is completed. And so now my workflow is basically constructed in the order I want. I want to pull my IIS services offline, back up my database, then deploy my application, and actually it looks like I don't have my SQL install defined there. Looks like that deployment or that workflow definition was missing that piece. So I'm just going to drop in the database upgrade right underneath the application content install. And then what I want to do, as I said earlier, is I'm just going to go to my applications list for this node that it will accept. I'm going to grab the schema install, and I'll just drop it right on that little role area here where that's workflow step here. And each one of these execute in series. If I wanted them to execute in parallel, then I would just add that into the role itself that I want to execute it with. So as we can see here, the SQL Server definition role itself is pulling the content. This identifies where it's pulling it from, and then the task itself, it's going to run those SQL Server commands. So this looks ready to go. What I want to do here is I can preview it. That's just going to give me a summary of what I've got here. I can dry run it, I can schedule it, or I can execute it directly. I can also view any tokens that are associated with this node or the servers that these nodes that I'm interacting with manage. So I'm going to actually dry run this first to give me that level of confidence that when I do go ahead and execute this job, that I can be certain that Orca is going to succeed. So what dry run does is it's going to go to each of the servers. It's going to look at each of the tasks that I want to perform. It's going to go to each of those servers that those tasks are going to run on, and it's going to make sure that any APIs or commands that those tasks are going to use are available and present, and also if I've identified any user that should run against those APIs or even the user that is moving content around, Orca is going to make sure that those users have the correct access credentials to that information.
Robin, I wanted to ask you a quick question here. I noticed that you were I've seen you do drop-down lists. I've seen you doing drag-and-drop kind of operations. I've seen you doing some right-clicking, but I haven't seen you scripting anything. What am I missing?
You're not missing anything at all. Everything that we're doing here today comes out of the box with Orca, or everything, all the interactions that we're doing to deploy this application, to upgrade the database, to make service changes. That's all out of the box with Orca, so you can start using them day one. So looks like our job here has failed, and so what we can do is just go through our list here to see where it actually failed. And I know as a fact that it's going to fail on Win Endpoint 1 because this is a demo. So let's take a look through the logs here. As you can see here, Orca is showing you the entire interaction that it performed against each individual server in this case. So it's going to report on what the environment settings are for that execution, and if it's and who the execution is being performed as. So first off, we can see that we're running as administrator, and then we also see that we are actually trying to change user to this production user. Now this doesn't look like an actual Windows or service username, so I'm betting that some configuration with inside Orca actually identified the wrong setting. So let me jump over to that node there that we're interacting with. In this case, it's the SQL Server node. And I can see here, yeah, that there it is. This is the login that this task against this set of servers is being attempted to be executed against. And that's not what we actually want. We want, this is actually a SQL Server user, and we want the scripts to run or interact as that user as opposed to the actual execution on the machine itself. So I'm just going to set that to none right now. I'm going to jump back to my job that just failed. This is our dry run. You can see here that Orca is reporting that it's a dry run job and that it's also a deployment as well. So that's the one that we've been working with today. And what I want to do here is just, I want to duplicate this job because I want to do it exactly the same way as I did before, and then I'm going to dry run it again. Now, so hopefully this time everything succeeds, and we will see that in just one moment. While that's processing, let's take another look at some of the things within Orca here. So you can see that it's gone to active. So I'm going to look at a specific node definition in this case here. So when we're looking at a node, we're looking at the details of that node here. The servers tab here identifies what servers this node is representing, and I have a searchable list of the servers that are defined in my within Orca right now. But the details itself, the role identifies what type of system this is, and this can be your middleware, database, OS level, anything along those lines. The inventory frequency here identifies how often Orca should poll the servers for the configuration for IIS in this case. If I want to execute anything against these servers, I can identify that user to execute against. And also I'm going to identify how long I'm going to keep configuration data around for. If there's people or groups of people who are interested in changes to this, I can set them in the subscribers group. If there's a set of users or groups that need to approve changes to the configurations or data on this set of servers, then I can identify that in the approvals group. And then also I can set security around this node as well, identifying which users should have access to the configuration and which users should even have visibility into this node as well, to see if it even shows up on their Orca view. Drift, as we said, it's actually for this node, this is sort of what's compared against when I capture configuration, what the baseline is. In this case, we're using a previous revision, and we don't have auto remediation turned on at this time since we're doing a deployment. And also, lastly, there's compliance rule sets. This is basically identifies what rules do I want to apply to the configuration data. So this is where I enter my CIS rules or any additional or modifications to that data or the compliance set I want to. If I have ServiceNow, I can click this and that would be enabled so that when changes occur against this node, that a ServiceNow ticket would be created. If I want to use ServiceNow's authentication as a sort of approval or approver, I can identify that here. Right now, if I have this checked, it would just create a ticket in ServiceNow. and not wait for that ticket to be approved. But if I uncheck that, then it's going to wait for that ticket in ServiceNow to be approved. We do exactly the same thing with Sherwood if you're using that as an ITSM system, and then we have a few other integrations with other lesser ITS systems too. But let's jump back to our reporting. We see that our dry run job has succeeded, and so I want to just go back over to that. I want to duplicate that, and then I want to execute it itself. Actually, I could have just done that right there, but anyway, I'm going to click execute here. We've duplicated it, and we're executing it. So now that's going to go ahead and perform that deployment, and then that should take a few minutes to perform. And while that's going ahead, I'm going to go back to our node, and we'll continue sort of navigating, seeing what Orca can do for us. So we're on the IIS. We just went through the details information. There's also this inventory list, and these are some of the things that come out of the box. So as I was saying, for IIS, what we're pulling for this set of servers in this case is the application pools. We're pulling the web application lists and websites, and also XML files down on the server itself. And so as we can see here, we have a few sort of tweaks we can make to that, or conditions we can add to that inventory list. So in this case, we're just limiting it to the blog engine application, which is the application we're actually deploying today. So we have some fine-tuning over that inventory that we're pulling. Similarly for SQL Server, we're pulling databases and logins in this case, and we are pulling this for the blog engine production database in this case. The logins are going to be pulled for that database as well as for the entire SQL Server instance itself too that it finds. And for Windows OS, in this case, we're going to be pulling the file system folders and files, so in this case just the directory structure, and we're also pulling system services information as well. So that's how we've got this configured for our production environment for this application. Now let's go back and see how our job is done. Okay, it looks like our deployment here has succeeded. So you can see here we've got oh actually it's still active, sorry. Getting too excited there, just getting ahead of myself. Orca makes me that way.
It is interesting. I'm watching you go through this, Robin, and you're working across application release, automation, and configuration management type workflows. I'm seeing you touch and affect applications, middleware, databases, even OSs, and nowhere are you scripting, and you're doing it from the very same unified kind of intuitive interface.
Yeah, you got it, Scott. We're doing a complete application deployment. We're sending the application files down. We are making changes to our database. We're also turning off system services before the deployment, and then we're turning them back on after the deployment as well, and doing the database backup all as one well-contained job. So, it's pretty straightforward. We try to make this as easy to use as possible and intuitive. And also, just on that, with Orca here, you don't have to have that deep, low-level knowledge of any kind of system you're interacting with. You just need to have this sort of cursory knowledge. Of course, all the information on Orca is going to be presented this exact same way. So whether it's file system information, I'm just navigating this configuration tree here of that data. Actually, it was just updating there because that job had finished. But like in the IIS, I navigate whatever the configuration I'm interested in exactly the same way. I'll just navigate piece by piece. Similarly, SQL Server, all this information is presented to me in the same way. If Orca's got that intelligence around each piece of configuration data, so that if I make a change to it, it's going to give me the correct options for that change. Anything that's Boolean values will give me a checkbox. Anything that is a list option is going to give me a list. If it's a multi-select, it's going to give me a list of options with different checkboxes. So it's as user-friendly as you can get, really.
And it's going to confine the choices to keep you in compliance.
Yeah, it's going to remove that aspect of sort of fat fingering a change. It's going to remove that human entry of these values for you when it comes to those list options. Now let's jump back to our reporting. We can see here that the deployment itself has succeeded. One thing I want to point out here is when Orca makes a change to any system, it's going to do an automatic inventory of that system so that the config data that is shown in Orca is the latest config data that is available after that change. So what you're looking at is as close to real time after that change as possible and up to date. Okay, so we've done our application deployment. Everything should be running nice and handily. We can see now that our production environment, it's basically been lit on fire. Orca said, oh, I've got a lot of changes going on here. What's going on, guys? And so that's because previously we had version 3.2 of this application running in this environment, and now we've upgraded it to version 3.3. So what I want to do here actually is I want to tag this version that we just inventoried as the 3.3 master version. Now normally I would do a sort of full check of the application itself before I do this, but as we're going to be tight on time, I don't want to do that right now. So I'm just going to assume everything is correct. So I've updated my IIS. I'm going to update my SQL Server. I'll tag that. 3.3 master config. I'm going to set this, update that to 3.3, save drift options. And then similarly with my Windows OS, I want to do exactly the same thing here. So that what I'm determining for drift is based upon what the 3.3 version should be and not the 3.2 version. And that should be it. I'm also going to turn on this auto remediate on the Windows OS because what I want to sort of imitate next is sort of this developer going in through some backdoor, or maybe I've left my system unlocked for some reason and somebody's gone in and messed with something that I didn't want them to mess with. So what I want to see now, or do now, is, okay, after a refresh we can see that everything is turned white, saying, okay, this is now my production standard. So I'm just going to switch over real quick to a developer. And let's resume here. And so here I am sort of acting as Dr. Evil or something like this, and I really want to mess with my ops team. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down this W3 service here. So let's stop it. Haha, that'll show them. No? All right, let's switch back to Orca and let's see what Orca can do. So I'm just going to click on the inventory. Normally what I'd have is this running at some frequency, but you know, let's just kick it off now because we know Dr. Evil's gone in the back door, messed with our systems. We didn't want him to do anything like that, but he did. So what Orca is going to do now, it's going to pull that configuration data. It was a system service that we messed with, or Dr. Evil messed with. It could have been a file system, anything like that. So Orca is going to, when it inventories, it's going to compare it against what is running right now or what we captured, and then it's going to detect that change that Dr. Evil made, and then it's going to automatically remediate it. So I would ask a question normally, okay, when something like that happens, how long does it take you to detect that issue? You know, IIS is down, all your websites are down. Yeah, there's probably only a few things that can make that happen, but you know, you're going to log into each system and then see, okay, what's going on here, what's going on here. That's going to take some amount of time. Now, Orca has just detected the issue there. So it's highlighted it as a drift. We can navigate down to see what that drift is. In this case, we see, it's too late. But we can go back to that in a minute. But let's take a look at the jobs here in this case. So Orca determined the drift here. Just looks like the remediation itself failed, so we can take a look at that. But now it's doing an inventory right after that change effect. But we'll see what's going on. So let's do a compare to see what it detected has changed. So I'm going to select that node itself. So in this case, we're in production, Windows OS. We're going to compare to itself here, so we can choose two different timestamps in this case. So I'm going to choose the 3.3 master config and the prior inventory version here. So we can see here the W3, I see what happened. So when we did the actual original inventory, the change was start pending. So we probably have to update that. These are some of the checks that you'd probably do before applying that tag.
But nonetheless, Orca saw that Dr. Evil came and
yep,
did
we
his
see
direct
exactly.
access.
That's right, Scott. We saw that the state of the W3 service went from running to stopped. And then that's the key thing that Orca keyed off of to sort of initiate that remediation job. What I can do actually in cases like that is if I want to ignore anything else other than the W3 service, then I can add a compliance rule to ignore that state and then just observe the specific services that I do want to monitor for this environment. So let me jump back to the ecosystem. Now it looks like Orca is going to attempt to remediate this 3 times before it actually says, nope, I can't remediate this fully because I can't put this service back into start pending. So Orca is going to alert me when that occurs. But one thing I do want to show just before we sort of finish up here is I'm going to compare again to itself. Now Orca will hopefully have started that, yeah. So now you can see it actually restarted the W3 service, but it was not able to put this other service back into the start pending state. So although it couldn't do everything to remediate that node back to its good state, it did as much as it could. So that's the last thing that I wanted to point out here. Now I'm just going to say that we've been interacting with Windows and IIS here. Orca works equally well in the Linux environment, AIX, no matter what that base operating system is that your middleware and applications are running on. Orca is just as happy no matter where it lives. Now, let me switch back over to our presentation.
Yeah, and we may now again we've seen Orca work kind of seamlessly across application release automation workflows and configuration automation workflows, apps, middleware, database, etc., all without scripting. And we're kind of showing you what we just showed you. You'll get this in the form of a deck when we're done. And I don't know, Charlene, if you have a moment to be able to show the remaining poll question and to maybe ask any other questions.
Yeah, we do have about 6 minutes left in the webinar, so I'm happy to run that last poll question, and I also want to remind the audience that if you haven't submitted your question yet, please feel free to do so. Even though we are quickly running out of time, both Scott and Robin are happy to answer your questions offline via email, so please don't hesitate to put in your question. But our final poll question for today is what do you use for your configuration management production environment? So commercial configuration management tool, an internally developed configuration management tool, or custom scripting. So go ahead and submit your answer to that polling question, and we'll go ahead and get to a couple questions before we close things out, and you can see the poll results there, but we'll also be tweeting those poll results out. So let's see, our questions, we have, let's see, we've got a lot of really great questions here, so let me go ahead and just start throwing these out here. James is asking, well, I think actually, Robin, you just answered this. He was asking whether the configuration management, whether Orca is mainly for Windows or Linux as well. But you did mention that. But can you real quick just discuss which OSs this does work with?
Yeah, as I said prior, we're equally happy in the Windows and the Linux environments. For Linux, we support a plethora of different middleware and databases and application types. So yeah, I think it's probably a conversation to take offline. At a later time we can get in contact with James and take it from there.
Great, great. We have another question here from Nilanjan, and I apologize if I butchered your name, but it's a great question. How does Orca collect the configuration details, and how much manual intervention is needed for the baseline state?
So I showed you a page where you could sort of tweak that inventory of what you're pulling for a specific service or application. What you'd want to do with Orca is, as I've shown, to sort of divide your application ecosystems up into their individual stack components, inventory each of those. Orca, to inventory each item, Orca will, it is an agent-based system. It is a proprietary agent. It's a very lightweight agent as well. And it's written in a low-level language and none of this sort of heavy Java agent stuff going on there. So Orca will connect to each of these services. It's over a secure connection. It will execute its own internal scripts that come out of the box to inventory that content. It will then normalize that data and present it to you in that sort of human readable and manageable format. To make tweaks to that data as it's coming in or it's being processed, you would do that through the compliance rule set. That will give you options to tokenize data that is expected to be different across servers for a particular piece of the stack for an application. You can filter out data. You can mark data as being ignored for drift purposes. So there's a whole bunch of different controls you can add around the configuration data to create that production standard, and then the amount of effort around it was going to really depend on the variance of that configuration data between the servers that you're managing for that layer of the application stack per application. Another thing is as these sort of compliance rules are associated as a group with a particular node, you can create a standard set that is used across all different applications for a particular type, or and then apply them to multiple different nodes. So sort of a bit of a long answer, but yeah, we can take more offline.
It's important though, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Great, well, we have about a minute left, so I don't think we have time for any other questions today, but as I said before, if you did not get your question answered, please look for an offline response from either Scott or Robin after the event. But with that, I would like to thank Scott Turner and Robin Fuller both for joining me today on this webinar and presenting some really fascinating information, and it was such a great comprehensive demo. So thank you to you both. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
Great.
It's been fun.
Great. As I said before, the webinar is being recorded, so it will be available 24 hours after the end of the event, and the slides also will be downloadable at that time. But for now, I would like to say again thank you to our panelists, and thank you for listening to this DevOps webinar. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.